This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
So the second chapter on human resources planning, it starts with appraisal, which we did mention in the last chapter. Just to recap, appraisal interviews typically happen about once a year. Employees' performance has to be monitored. They do need feedback, either positive feedback or telling them that they need to do better. Everyone wants to know how they're kind of doing. You might have to point out where their work is unsatisfactory, but it's not all negative. You can say where the work is very satisfactory, of course, but pointing out shortcomings are important, if you like, to stop the rot. You may get into a conversation of where extra training may be required, or where perhaps the employee wants extra training because they're particularly interested in some aspect of the organization's activities. You might be giving them some indication of when promotion might be due. So you could say, if you keep advancing the way you're doing, then this time next year we'll be thinking of promoting you to a supervisor's position. And it determines, or at least tells people, what their pay and bonuses are going to be. Usually bonuses for last year might be told to them, pay for the next year. And of course the employee has to really enter into this as well, ideally. The employee can tell you maybe what they like, what they don't like, whether they're unhappy, can tell you about their interests and so on. And it ought to be, as we'll see very shortly, it ought to be a kind of a dialogue, a conversation, rather than the manager just going tell. It's very important for appraisal interviews that the manager takes time to prepare. There's nothing more irritating than having waited a whole year for your appraisal interview, and you go in and the manager clearly doesn't know what you've been doing during the year, what your colleagues think of you, has no feedback from customers, and the whole thing becomes a real time-wasting disappointment because you're not getting any proper appraisal. You have to be fairly careful about criticisms. Generally, people are taught when they're being trained and doing appraisals, carrying out appraisals, that rather than saying something is good and something is bad, it might be more productive to say, well, this is good and this isn't quite so good, this needs a little bit of work. The whole idea should be, we all want you to succeed, and how can we do it, rather than to say, you're no good at that, and kind of leaving it. The methods of appraisal, the one that's not really thought to be very good, well, it's not very good. It's just the manager coming in. The manager may have filled in some sort of appraisal form. You get these forms with various qualities going down here, like technical ability, punctuality, ability to get on with clients, ability to get on with staff, and so on. A whole lot of kind of qualities, and then maybe you're scored -5 to kind of +5, some sort of scale. And the manager, you go in and the manager's filled all this in. And it kind of hands it to you and says, well, there it is. You're not very good at that, pretty good at that, you're kind of average at that, and so on. But there's no real dialogue, and the manager doesn't actually really even want to know your point of view. So you might be bad at something, but you might have a reason why you were bad at something. Maybe you were asked to do something for which you had no training, but that's not present in this approach to appraisal. Tells and sells, the manager will tell you that you're -4 on something, and then try to persuade you that that is the right score. But no matter what you say in your defense, that -4 is not going to change. It's always regarded as a sign of weakness if the manager changes the -4 to and being -2. It's kind of admitting that the manager was wrong. So that's not really regarded as too good either. The problem solving, imagine the problem solving. This is a more supportive one. We're not pointing fingers of blame at where you're poor. We want you to get better. And one way of doing the problem solving is you go in and your appraisal sheet is blank. And the manager says here, right, technical ability. What do you reckon your score is, or your grade should be on technical ability? And you say, well, I think it should be +2. And the manager says, well, I think it's maybe -1. So you've got this disparity in scores. And of course, what you have to do is try to reconcile them. So it forces you into much more of a dialogue. The manager has to say why you think it's she thinks it's -1. You have to think why you think it's +2. And it should encourage a much greater degree of communication and understanding. And maybe you settle on 0 or whatever. It doesn't really matter what you settle on. The point is that you've had the discussion. As well as it being kind of top down, which is really what we're talking about here, more and more organizations have got what they call 360-degree appraisals. Manager appraises you, you appraise your manager, colleagues appraise each other. This is often done through a kind of computer mechanisms which allow people to remain anonymous. Because quite obviously you might feel embarrassed about giving somebody a -2, or you might be frightened to do it, because they might then, or you might think they want to get their own back later on. So there are all sorts of ways of trying to build in a bit of anonymity to the system. Barriers, things that basically go wrong in the performance appraisal interviews. It can be very confrontational. Manager says, you're no good at this, and you say, well, I disagree. And the whole thing, and you say, well, this happened, I wasn't given time, I wasn't given training, and the whole thing becomes a real fight, really, as to who was right. Emotions get riled, and the whole thing does more harm than good. Excessive judgment. The manager basing, let's say, scores on judgment which is not really based on much evidence. It's too opinionated. And of course what you worry about there is that you're getting a low score, not because you're not good at something, but because the manager doesn't like you. There's some sort of personality clash. And that's not great news either. Chat is kind of avoiding the whole business of appraisal. You go in and discuss all sorts of stuff, except maybe where you aren't very good at something. The manager is almost avoiding telling you some bad news. And though it may be very pleasant, it's not going to help you get any better in the future. So it's too friendly, chatty, informal. It doesn't really, define where improvement is needed. And it's a bit of a waste of time. Bureaucracy, where there is overly amounts of forms to fill in, lots and lots of box ticking and so on. And because of all this box ticking and form filling, you never really get down to talking and discussing with people. The bureaucracy has taken over. And to some extent, that's maybe what is happening in the event as well. We're doing the annual appraisal because it's time for the annual appraisals. And we go through this kind of pantomime almost of carrying out the appraisal. But there's no real communication. Your manager does it because it's your manager's job. You go in because you're told to go in. You go through the process. You're almost like acting it out, really. And then 50 minutes you're out again, and that's done for that year. And finally, there's unfinished business. If the manager says, right, you need this training, we're going to send you on this training course, you need to make sure it happens. If your manager says, we're going to second you to this department because you've expressed an interest in taxation or whatever, then that has to happen. If the manager says, you haven't been doing very well, I'm going to ask for more opinions in 3 months' time to see if you've improved, then you have to make sure that's happened. So the unfinished business, what you have to do is make notes of, if you like, conclusions and maybe targets which have been established during the appraisal process. Typically, the employee will sign a copy, the manager will sign a copy. So both people have records of what was discussed, what's been agreed and what's been promised. And then next year you can look back at this and say, well, this is what we agreed last year. Have we moved forward or not? Competency frameworks. The easiest way to look at a competency framework is this. A competence is really a skill that you need to carry on your job. What you need to be competent at. People break down the jobs, if you like, into almost the job description or job definition. Yes, you have to be good at technical skills on internal auditing. You have to be good at communicating with customers. You have to be good at running a meeting. You have to be good at making a presentation. You have to be good at working the accounting system, putting through journals or whatever. Most jobs consist of a whole range of little individual competences that make up the whole task. So a competency framework simply sets those out, and it will have a target performance, because you don't have to be 100% good at everything, and then you will have your actual performance assessed in some way, maybe by your manager, maybe by people you're working with, and the like. So here we have a little example. So fire safety, your target is 80, but we did a little test. You don't know very much about that. You really have to improve that. You seem to be pretty much on target with ethics. You're approaching sainthood there. Excel, you really ought to be really spot on with Excel, because you're using it every day, really. But actually, you don't know how to do lookup tables, or you can't produce very good graphs and so on there. So we have a bit of a gap here between certain aspects of your skills. And this can be used, if you like, as a part of the appraisal interview. It can also be used in recruitment, because the actual performance here could be your assessment of what a potential recruit is good at, and you're comparing that to what you need. And that's the way you get the right person. You have a list of requirements, what the new recruit ought to be able to do, and you want to get the best match possible from your candidates to those requirements. Making sure you match on competences, make sure you don't match on irrelevancies, like maybe how much you like that person. It keeps many of the potential prejudices at bay. You're matching on this kind of objective basis. This is what we need. This is what that candidate can supply. That's a perfect match. Training and development. Often the phrases used together. Strictly they are different. Training is something which is very specific, which you really need for your job kind of today or tomorrow, really. Development is much less specific, and you may not need to use these skills for another year or so. So in training, you may be trained on how to use the company's accounting system. In development, they may say, as you progress through your career, at some point you're going to have to give appraisal interviews to your staff. So let's add that to your list of competencies, really. Let's send you on a kind of giving appraisal course, so that if you are made a supervisor, you know how to carry that out. Or if you're interviewing people, you already have been giving an interviewing skills course. So this is equipping employees for future jobs. The first thing that you have to do on training and development is usually regarded as a needs assessment. And a needs assessment is simply working out what does this person need by way of training and development to carry out their job properly or to equip them for their future job. Training is quite expensive. People are taken out of their work environment maybe for a day or something. You may be paying a training organization quite a lot of money. And you need to target the training to get really value for money, and also to make sure that somebody doesn't miss out on training that they particularly need. So training needs assessment is the first step, a planning stage. And then you have to decide how to deliver the training. It can be formal face-to-face courses, basically somebody standing up and lecturing maybe to a group or leading a seminar. It could be within the company's premises, it could be outside. Maybe they hire a kind of hotel venue for the day. The great thing about being outside is that it tends to allow people to concentrate on the course without constantly being interrupted because they're in the office. Coaching is where you basically learn from a colleague. This is, if we think, how are auditors taught? Well, first week they're probably given a formal face-to-face course, for example, on how to fill in the company's audit documentation. But most auditing is then learnt on the job. You go out in a small team of people. There is a supervisor there. You're given a little task to do. The supervisor tells you what to do. The supervisor reviews what you've done, tells you where you've gone wrong, watches you doing it, gives help and support. That is coaching. And this makes sure it's done in a work environment. It makes sure that you are taught precisely the skills you need to carry on your job. Shadowing is where you shadow a skilled person, maybe for a week. So you are maybe shadowing the chief accountant. You sit in on meetings. You gain, an insight really, and knowledge about other aspects of the firm. Computer-based training software. To some extent, what you're watching is computer-based training. It means that you don't have to leave the office. It means you don't have to wait until a course is coming up, because most computer-based training is available on demand. It can be almost like just-in-time training. It can be a lecture delivered like this, or it can be an interactive program. It teaches you something, asks you a few little questions. If you get them right, it goes on. If you get them wrong, it gives some remedial training and so on. So you work through it like that. Quite expensive to set up, but once it's set up, then it delivers training very, very economically. There can be self-study. You give people manuals. Sometimes people are sponsored by their employers to go for a qualification, maybe a CIMA qualification, maybe an MBA qualification, but a wide variety of training delivery methods. So here we have, going back to establish the training development needs, set the objectives. After this person comes from this course, they should be able to work the company's accounting system, plan the training, the right people, the right time, when it's suitable for them to go, have the training delivered, and then you need feedback. You've spent a lot of money on this training. Is the person actually coming back equipped with the skills we need? Because if they're not, then something's gone wrong with this training. We've wasted a lot of money and time, and we've incurred delay because we still have a person who's not able to carry on the job. Motivation. We've said already that motivation is encouraging someone to run towards a target rather than simply amble towards a target. How do we inspire people? How How do we fire them up? And there are goodness knows how many theories of motivation churned out by management theorists. We'll look at just one. This is a relatively old one, but it gives you the idea of maybe some motivating factors and the like. And this is by a person called Hertzberg, who invented something called the hygiene theory, or two-factor theory. Now, hygiene, a peculiar word to use maybe. Hygiene you maybe really associate with kitchens or hospitals. It means clean, germ-free. And what Hertzberg was saying, really, is if you go hygiene in a hospital doesn't make you well, but having a hygienic hospital is a first step before you can apply the medicine, before you can cure someone. So it is a starting point. If something is not hygienic, you are never going to make somebody better. So within a job environment, Hertzberg was saying you have to have certain factors which must be right as your starter. And if any of these are wrong, you will never ever manage to motivate someone. So the sort of things he said that you have to get right would be like giving people enough money to live on. So if people are constantly worried that they won't be able to pay the rent, then it's very difficult for them to turn any sort of attention towards their job. If they feel that they have bad relations with their colleagues, so that they almost dread coming in every morning because of these dreadful colleagues, this will, just dominate all their thoughts at work, and nothing else is going to work. You need reasonable physical conditions, not too noisy, not too dusty, reasonable temperature, reasonable chairs to sit on, and not too crowded and so on. Because again, if you're coming into work and it's really noisy, dirty, uncomfortable, cramped, then this again will become a kind of obsession, or quite rightly, a kind of obsession with you, and nothing else is going to work. And the feeling that you're being fairly treated. If you feel that because of your race or your sex, that you are not being treated fairly, that you're not being paid the same amount as colleagues, you're not being given the same opportunities for promotion as colleagues, again, this is going to dominate your thought process and nothing else is going to work. Having got these basic items right, then you can begin to motivate people, to actually inspire people. And Hertzberg said the sort of things which really inspire people would be recognition and praise. So you do something well, your boss simply telling you, you did that really well. You're well done. You go away with a spring in your step. After that, you will be inspired. A feeling that you are improving yourself, advancing, learning skills, so that it will help you promotion within this company, or maybe even getting a better job somewhere else, that you are safer because you have these skills and so on. That is a great motivator. A feeling that what you're doing is worthwhile. So you could see that maybe a doctor will get a lot of motivation from simply carrying out their jobs and making people better. A feeling of having responsibility. You put in charge of something, you do it well, and then your boss recognizes that and congratulates you. It's the best motivator in the world. Hertzberg eventually said, not in his first go at the theory, but eventually said that money can motivate. He put money in two sides of it here. First of all, you need basic money to live on. But then he said out here you can also have some money as well. So if you're said you will get a bonus of 10% of your salary if you achieve this, this and this, this is going to, for most people, motivate them towards trying to achieve those three targets. Another method of motivation, or something to look at in motivation, is job design. So a poor job is a repetitive job, not making use of your skills, not allowing you to expand your skills and to grow. So, costs of poor job design, people will leave. Boring job, not going anywhere, dead-end job, you will move to somewhere else as soon as you can. And of course this puts a recruitment burden back on your company. People won't want the job, so there'll be a cost of maybe staff shortages. The job may be carried out to a poor quality level because it's boring, people don't see the point of it, people can't stand it, they're only there, if you like, because they need the money to live on. And people will simply not be that interested in trying to improve production methods or the service which is provided. Better jobs should provide higher intrinsic motivation, and an intrinsic reward is one which comes from inside. In other words, you get an enjoyment from the job, you feel you're learning, you feel you're applying your skills. That's what you want from a good job. It will give higher job performance. If you're interested in the job, you probably do it better, the quality will be better. Greater employee satisfaction, lower absenteeism, lower staff turnover comes from providing people with better jobs. Now, job design is the practice of deliberately trying to change what's in a job, change what people have to do to try to make the job better. The first two here don't really work very much, but they are potentially methods of job design. First of all, job enlargement. This literally means more of the same. It means that if you were on a car production line, here's the car, and you're standing here, and your job is to put on the front wheels. So every car that comes past you, you're putting on the front wheels. Job enlargement would be say, well, you can also put on the back wheels. So it's literally kind of more of the same. It's what's called a horizontal change, because there's no real additional skills or interest added by that job. So it's probably not very effective in improving the job. Job rotation is again, it's a horizontal skills type of move. But this would say, well, this week you're putting on the wheels. Next week you can put on the bumpers or fenders, whatever you want to call them. The next week you can put on the wiper blades, and then you go back to wheels. It may break up the monotony a little bit, but they're all basically same kind of skill levels there, and again not thought to be very good at improving the real nature of the job. Job enrichment, however, is a vertical change. And job enrichment would be, you tell the person, right, you're putting on the wheels, the car is going past you pretty slowly as you're putting on the wheels. I want you to look at the paintwork here, and I want you to do a little kind of quality control check, and I want you to put a little sticker or something everywhere you think there's a little blemish on the paintwork. So now that is a vertical change because you're having to use judgment a little bit. You're doing something which is maybe a little bit more interesting, looking at every car, being kind of critical of every car. You'll feel rewarded because you're the person who picked up the little bubble in the paint and reported it. And this is injecting more variety, more interest, more responsibility, more feeling of a job well done into the overall job. And this is probably going to be a more motivating job than one where you just put the wheels on all the time. Rewards, extrinsic rewards, awards which come from outside. So your pay is extrinsic. Your boss saying well done is extrinsic. Winning a salesperson of the month type award is extrinsic. It's coming from outside you. Intrinsic means coming from inside you. It's a feeling I've learned something. It's a feeling I've done well. It's a feeling, well, that was interesting. I had a problem and I solved it. That makes me feel really good. It's a feeling of, oh, I've been given responsibility. I like this responsibility and I'm carrying it out quite well. And the satisfaction, this internal satisfaction you get from a job well done, is essentially the intrinsic reward. And it's very, very powerful and motivating. Pay can be a motivator, as we've said. You can have base pay, which is your standard pay per month. Let's say, $3,000, $2,000, whatever it's going to be. On top of that, you can have performance pay. So if you hit a particular target, then maybe you get a 10% bonus. That's performance-related pay. And you can have indirect pay. And indirect pay is like giving you health benefits, giving you a company car, giving you, free lunches in the canteen. That's what's known as indirect pay. Performance pay is the one which is, in a way, the most interesting one. How we relate somebody's performance to pay. It sounds like a good idea. You do well, you get more money. It's actually quite complicated to do in practice. The easiest people really to do it for are salespeople, where you give them some sort of a commission here based on the number of units they sell or the sales value of orders which they produce. And it's relatively easy because by and large a salesperson is responsible for getting those orders. It's very much kind of one-to-one. I got the order, I should get the reward type of situation. In many other roles within an organization, you are not isolated. So the fact that you win a big contract is not maybe just your work. It's a work of a whole team of people within the contract. The department or the division has won the contract, but this is on the basis maybe of obviously the salespeople in the contract. It's maybe on the basis of the people who presented to get the work. It's maybe based also on the people in production who made a prototype which convinced the buyer that you were the people to get the contract and so on. Also, another example, you get these interdependencies. If a machine breaks down, then, of course, as interferes with production, can interfere with sales. If the buyer buys cheap material, this is going to, in a way, produce units which are maybe shoddy, which break down. And so, a decision made by the buyer is maybe then eventually felt by the people who have to deal with this bad material in production, and then the people who have to deal with complaints from customers. So you get a lot of kind of interdependencies going on, which can make it quite difficult to separate out what the fair level of profit-related pay is going to be. So there is performance-related pay. You get this exam, for example, then you'll get a pay rise. That is performance-related pay. Incentive pay is saying if you hit wastage of less than 1% of material, then that's your incentive to get there. Profit-related pay looks at the profit for the company or the division, and maybe everybody shares in some way 10% of the profits of the business. It's usually problematical how you share that 10% out to different people within the organization. A share-based plan is particularly there to get people to maybe stay longer. What you don't want to do is give people a big bonus and then they feel wealthy and leave. Share-based plans are often based on what are called share options. So what you say is, in 5 years, you can buy 1,000 shares at, say, $1 each. This means that you have to stay 5 years. It also means that the shares are only going to be worth buying at $1, provided they are greater than $1. So it incentivizes people to work hard to get the share price of the company raised so they can make a profit on this option. If the company doesn't do very well and the share price has gone down to, let's say, 75, then the option is worthless. So share-based payments, options, build in a kind of longer-term loyalty to the company. It's not just take the money and run. It is saying, this is really only going to be worthwhile to me if in the long term the company does well. It's also congruent with what the shareholders want. The shareholders want their shares to up in value. And here we have a method of performance pay, which is encouraging employees to work to get the share prices increasing. Merit pay is a more formulaic method. It's kind of saying, well, you've been here a year, you've been doing okay, here's a little bonus for staying for the year and doing okay. It's not particularly related maybe to performance. Finally, on this, if you are setting some sort of performance-related pay, generally speaking, you quite often are going to have some sort of objectives. You will get this bonus if you do this, if you achieve that. And when you're selling objectives to people or setting objectives for people, then you have to make sure that they are the following. They have to be specific. You can't just say you must be a better employee. You have to say that you have to achieve this, you have to pass this exam, you have to get your feedback improved from customers by this amount. So it has to be specific. It has to be measurable. So again, you can't simply say you have to be a better employee. You have to say, and we're going to measure this by the volume of sales you make, or we're going to measure this by the number of rejected products you make, or we're going to measure this by looking at the percentage by weight of wasted material. So it has to be measurable. If it's not measurable, it's going to become too subjective, too judgmental. You have to agree it, you have to feel it's achievable. If you set somebody an objective which is so high and so difficult that they say to themselves, it doesn't matter how hard I work, I'm never going to get it, the sensible employee will simply not try. We have a saying in the UK, you may as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. So if you know you're going to miss some target, and there's nothing you can do to hit the target, you may as well miss it in a big way, because you're still going to be shouted at. And it has to be time limited. It has to be, you must do this in 6 months, you must do this in a year. People must know the kind of timetable to which they're working.